And Amy, so action reaction. Last week, the Obama regime, the cackler, and all of the associated acolytes talked about the assault weapon, quote unquote, not resuscitating the quote unquote assault weapon ban from 94 to 2004, doing some version of it with one of the guns that the Orlando killer used would have been covered by the assault weapon ban? Don't know. It wasn't manufactured at the time. And it speaks to how capricious the assault weapon ban was during the decade that it existed. Guns with similar functionality, some were banned, some weren't banned. It was all aesthetics and look because you have politicians who don't know the first thing about weapons trying to regulate them. And then there's this in terms of reaction from the political class or reaction to the political class. Hunter's warehouse owner, Tom Engel, told Fox Business over the weekend that his online shop, which carries an inventory of between 300,000 to 400,000 weapons, sold 30,000 AR-15s last week alone. 30,000. Because the AR-15, of course, was profiled.
What's on the hit list, right?
Well, but it was profiled life-size on the front page of the Boston Globe because, the D.C. press corps doing the bidding of their leftist and political office in D.C., demagoguing the issue. And so the reaction. We know that these rifles are used in a fraction of crimes committed, particularly violent crimes. So, of course, the real game is for handguns if you were serious about trying to focus on weaponry alone, and they don't want to do that because it's not politically feasible, not politically palatable. So they demagogue certain rifles. Well, there's a Navy SEAL named Dom Rosso who explained the AR-15 in a different way.
Let me say something to every political hack pretending you know an AR-15 from a double-barreled shotgun in the wake of the Orlando terror attack. Stop talking. Every word not only exposes your ignorance, but your utter contempt for ordinary Americans trying to survive in an age of terror you still won't fully recognize. Hillary Clinton says weapons of war have no place on our streets and that we need to ban AR-15s immediately. Unlike Hillary, I've actually used an AR-15, but fully automatic. I was a SEAL for 12 years. Now I train average everyday Americans to protect themselves and their families. And for the vast majority of people I work with, there is no better firearm to defend their homes against realistic threats than an AR-15 semi-automatic. It's easy to learn and easy to use. It's accurate. It's reliable. And I guarantee if the Founding Fathers had known this gun would have been invented, they wouldn't have rewritten the Second Amendment. They would have fortified it in stone.
So there you go.
I'm scared.
So speaking of veterans, speaking common sense, we're now happy to be joined by Army Colonel Allen West, former congressman, now the president and CEO of the National Center for Policy Analysis in Texas. Colonel West, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Dan and Amy. How are you all?
Good. So as a member of Congress, you're, I'm sure, watching the debate over guns that's taking place on Capitol Hill, the Senate to vote on a number of measures today, and your reaction to that.
Well, I'm absolutely disgusted and appalled. Why aren't they voting on a resolution to destroy ISIS? We just had, chatter and intel come out that says ISIS is planning attacks against several U.S. military bases all across the world. And again, we had Loretta Lynch, who all of a sudden has decided that today, when they release the 911 conversations that Omar Mateen had, they're going to censor, and they're going to cut out certain pieces, especially the pieces that talk about his declaring allegiance to the Islamic State. So again, we see the mantra of the Obama administration is obfuscation, denial, and lying when it comes to understanding and dealing with Islamic jihadism and terrorism. And let me just remind people of something. The Moore, Oklahoma Islamic jihadist attack, where the woman was beheaded at a chicken processing facility and another woman was in the process of being beheaded, that assailant was taken down by an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle from a reserve law enforcement officer who went to his vehicle, retrieved that weapon, and took down that assailant. And this past weekend, on Father's Day, I went out And I have two AR-15s, and I just shot my newer AR-15 from Spike Tactical. It's the Crusader model. And I'm happy and proud to be, part of the Second Amendment and to be able to go out and shoot my semi-automatic rifle. And I don't need people who have the, armed protection telling me that I need to be defenseless.
Well, when I'm looking at the four bills before Congress, it doesn't say banning any assault rifles. They're talking about, 3 days approval time if an individual attempts to buy a gun that might be on a terror watch list.
Well, the bottom line is this, Amy. This young man, Omar Mateen, should have never been taken off a list. This is the real problem we need to look at. The fact that you have an organization, the Council for American Islamic Relations, which is an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest Islamic terrorism funding case in the U.S. history, the Holy Land Foundation, has influence and impact with the Obama administration, and they have been the ones up there getting the FBI and the Department of Defense to scrub their manuals of Islamic jihadism training and other things of that nature, and they're the ones influencing. Mateen should have not been taken off of investigation. As a matter of fact, he should have been handed over to local police. So just the same with Nidal Hasan, who we knew was communicating with Anwar al-Awlaki, and all of these other cases. This is not about us looking at individuals on a watch list. We have the processes, we have the procedures, but we are hamstringing our law enforcement agencies and officers. We have these insidious rules of engagement that prevent our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines from engaging and killing this enemy. That's what we need to be looking at.
What do you think about no fly, no buy? Donald Trump has seemed to embrace it, although there's some muddle there. But your view on that proposal?
Well, I think you should talk to Stephen Hayes of the Weekly Standard because he was even on the no-fly list. So, again, we have issues with the government being able to maintain these lists. And then there's also the thing about due process for the American citizens. So, again, here we are a week after the second largest Islamic terrorist attack in the U.S. history, the largest mass shooting in the U.S. history. And we're not talking about the enemy. We're not talking about what really is the impetus behind this. There's been no actions. There's been no retribution against ISIS. We're sitting around here and we're debating about how we need to, have even more stringent measures. That didn't stop Saeed Farouk out there with Tashfeen Malik. Have we corrected the fiancé visa program that Tashfeen Malik was able to get here on? And the fact that she lied and put down a false address, but she was still able to gain entry to the United States of America.
Now, Loretta Lynch is releasing, edited transcripts of the 911 calls that Omar made to, the SWAT team negotiators. What is unsettling about that? Why they're not releasing A, the audio, and B, just edited portions?
Well, again, it's almost as if they want to protect this individual. They want to, deny who he was. Omar Mateen, his last interview and investigation with the FBI was because he had an association with the first American suicide bomber who killed himself in Syria. That should have flagged him for, forever. But yet again, we see why was he taken off of the investigation? Why was he taken off of any list whatsoever? So, we are not looking at what the real problem is. We are creating all of these, sideshow, straw man arguments that's based upon an ideological agenda. And look, the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, once said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think this is what you see happening now from our elected officials.
Speaking of crisis, do we have one with Donald Trump? A report out this weekend about a resurgent dumb Trump movement with some delegates that are attending the Republican National Convention next month, and they are suggesting there should be a conscience clause added to release delegates from their first ballot requirements to support Donald Trump. And we're having this conversation against the backdrop of another important story that emerged over the weekend, the possibility that Clarence Thomas may be interested in retiring after this presidential election.
Well, look, the next election is really all about Supreme Court, and that's I think a premier issue because if you have activist judges sitting on the Supreme Court, as we see in many of the other federal circuit courts, like the Ninth Circuit Court, who just ruled against the Second Amendment in California, we have a big problem. But I think the issue with Donald Trump is that it is about discipline, it's about self-control, and he really hurt himself the past couple of weeks when he got off message and started talking about his own personal legal case with Trump University and this judge. This was at the exact same time when we were told about 38,000 jobs produced in the last month of May, a 0.8% GDP growth from the last quarter that even got downgraded. So those are the things we should be talking about. If your mantra, your theme is, make America great, then talk about how you're going to do that. Talk about how you're going to get Americans back to work, how you're going to rebuild our military as a premier deterrent force, how we're going to defeat the enemies that are out there, and talk about these issues instead of getting off message. So I think that has caused people a little bit of consternation.
And House Speaker Paul Ryan has essentially tried to kind of walk the middle here, kind of washing his hands of the process. The convention rules are the convention rules. If the delegates want to change them out of a matter of conscience, then that's their right. I'm staying out of it. Do you think he's playing it right?
I can't make that call for, the Speaker of the House. I think that, right now you have someone that achieved the magic number, 1,237 delegates, but there is an onus upon the nominee to show that he is going to unite the party, and you have to understand, again, your policy vision is going to require a legislative agenda to be able to support it. So there's a need for both of them to sit down and start developing those things, and I just don't see that happening. And at some point in time, that has to happen.
All right. He is Colonel Allen West, of course, decorated Army Lieutenant Colonel, former U.S. Congressman, now the president and CEO of the National Center for Policy Analysis in Texas. Colonel West, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always my pleasure, Dan and Amy. You all take care.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.